We're super excited to announce that SpeedTree 10 has a new workflow to assign curves to a custom mesh. And yes, that means adding wind to an imported mesh directly inside SpeedTree. And also it means that adding procedural parts to that custom mesh is way easier than before. In this video, we'll go over two projects. So the first is a tree and the other one will be a rose. Let's dive into it. Here we have a custom tree that was hand sculpted and then textured and imported into the model. So if I were to just apply wind by going through the wind wizard, so just clicking on that and then OK. So what it does is that it's creating a bending animation based on the height of the custom mesh. So it's perfect if you're working out of a mesh that looks kind of like a cylinder, like a usual trunk. But if you have something more complex like this tree, that's not really the right animation. We would want the branches to move separately and have a waving motion through the trunk. So that's why we're going to add curves to that mesh. As a reminder, if you want to add a mesh to your scene, simply go to the Meshes panel, click on the plus, and then this window will appear so you can select your mesh. It's the same thing for materials, so just click on the plus sign and then select your material. Then you can add a mesh generator in your scene and assign it the material. And also don't forget to assign the mesh to your material so you have something to work with in your scene. The first thing we're going to need to create a curve is a mesh helper. If you've used a mesh converter before, it's kind of the same thing. So by here, I'm going to click on mesh helper and we see two buttons appear. We have one with an S for start and one with an E for end. So S is for the start of the curve. So we want it at the base of the curve or the trunk or whatever object we want to add a curve to. End is for end, E is for end, I should say. So we want it to be more at the tip of the branch. Right now, I'm not going to put it all the way down because I want a different behavior between kind of the extension and the main trunk. So to place those buttons, I'm clicking on one button, hold T on my keyboard, and then I'm clicking on the mesh. It's going to place the button in the middle of the geometry. Then I'm clicking on E, holding T on my keyboard, and then clicking on my mesh. There's also another way you can select either one of those buttons. So you could click on Select Body, and it's going to toggle between the two buttons. It can be very handy if you have a lot of them in your scene. So right now we see we have a straight line. We don't want that. We want it to follow the silhouette of the mesh. So by clicking on Set Point Seconds, and we see we have a yellow border appearing in our scene, we can now click on the mesh and add some points to that curve so it follows the trunk. Here I'm simply clicking on the mesh to add the points in the center of the geometry. If you turn around and you see that you made a mistake, you can always undo, so Ctrl Z on your keyboard, and replace your points. Once you're happy with your curve, you can send the spine. It means assigning the curve to another generator. So here I'm clicking on the mesh. And if we look in the generator window, we see that we have a new spine generator next to the mesh generator. And also you see its appearance change, so we know it's set. If you see that your curve is wrong, you can go into node mode and move the points individually. Now that we're done with the trunk, we can move on to a branch. So I'm going to take the same mesh helper, clicking on the S button, holding T on my keyboard and placing it at the base of the branch, then clicking on E, holding T, clicking on the branch. And to remove the points, I'm clicking on Clear Point Seconds. So you see now we have the same straight line. So again, I'm going to set the point seconds and just clicking on the branch to make sure the curve follows the silhouette. Then I can send my spine, but this time I'm going to click on the spine I already created. So if we look in the generator window, we see we now have a new spine generator next to the previous one we created because we want this hierarchy in our scene. So you have a choice. You could use the same mesh helper over and over again if you wanted to, or you could create a new one for each one of your curves. It's totally up to you. It depends if you prefer to clear 0.2 seconds each time or click on add mesh helpers. Either way, if you need to modify your mesh later, you can always create a new mesh helper and everything will be fine. So it doesn't matter that much. Now I'm going to do the same thing. So we have the S, I'm holding T on my keyboard and then placing it on my branch, E at the end. And then we have our curve, and then it's going to be pretty much the same thing over and over again. So just placing my points, and then sending the spine. And you see here in the menu, we have two options. So we can send it in the same generator, spine 2, or create a new generator. So if you wanted to have different behaviors on both those branches, you would create a new generator. So for this mesh, this asset in particular, I want some branches to have a lot of leaves on them and others to be more dead. So I'm going to create a new generator for the next branch. Again, adding a new mesh helper. So placing my start and then my end and then placing it. And then I created a new generator. It can become very messy in your generation window with all those spines that having the same name, so I would really recommend naming them accordingly. You will save yourself a lot of trouble because it can become tricky to know where you want to send your spines. And then it's going to be repetitive, so I'm going to speed up the process here. So once you get the pattern of it, it's going to be very easy for you to do your whole mesh very rapidly. So just placing points on all of my little branches. And here I'm slowing down again because I think it's interesting. So you see I made a mistake before. The start is not at the right place. So what I'm doing is going into node mode and then simply deleting the curve. So now I can just replace my start button and then sending the spine again to the proper spine generator. And there I have my new curve. So you could decide to delete some of your curves, to change them, and the rest will be completely fine. So you can always come back and forth and make iteration to your scene. Now that we're done with our curves, we can go into the scene objects, click on mesh helper and toggle the visibility. So now we see we have all our curve. And now what I want to do is activate the wind on those curves. First, I'm going to change the wind mode because I want visual effect for this. And then I'm selecting all my curves and making sure I have wind applied. Then going on my mesh into the wind panel, I'm applying wind. And also for the compute weights, I want the best guess and manual. And now if I click on the fan and then enable the wind, we have an animation for our custom mesh. So the trunk is moving in a waving motion and all the branches move separately. Let's take a look at the wind weights. So this is level 1 and we see that there's a little color in one of the roots. We don't want that because we want them to be stationary. So where there's color, it means that there's more motion. But there's a way we can adjust the wind weights. So if we go into the freehand mode and then vertex edit, we can select the vertices we need to modify. So here, if I simply click on the spacebar on my keyboard and then left click, I can paint vertices, select them. And so we have some options. So we could ignore back facing. That means I'm only going to select the vertices I can see directly, not the one behind. We also have this really amazing tool that's called Flow. And oops, sorry about that. It means I can only select vertices that are linked directly to each other. So that way you make sure that you only select the one branch you're trying to fix. We also have select all, clear selection after that. If you want to add some to your selection, you can hold the spacebar, Control, and then left click. And if you want to remove some vertices from your selection, just hold the spacebar and then right click on your mouse. Then we can soft select. So we have a few options from the propagation. Let me just make it bigger. So you see everything that is in baby blue is soft selected. I'm going to remove it because I don't need it for now. I just need to select those little vertices. And then I can either pick a spine if I want the vertices to be affected by a specific spine. I could forget a spine so it doesn't get affected by that spine. And I can make it stationary, which means it's going to make everything black so it won't move anymore. And that's what we want for the root. The two other options there are selecting vertices from a spine or transfer the information to other LODs. Now that we're done, we can look at the wind weights too. And you can see here that the best guess we chose from when we assign the wind weight options on our mesh is really great. So we don't need to do much more on this one, but you could go fully manual if you wanted to. If you have a more complex mesh, meaning that the vertices are closer to each other, like the one that just appeared. So here we have a rose and each petal has been modeled separately and combined into a single custom mesh. It means that when the best guess wind weights happen, it's going to have trouble determining which vertices go with which curve. But we have a tool for that, and stay tuned for the last part of the video where I'll show you how you can use vertex color to assign vertices to specific curves. But for our tree, everything is fine. If we look at the wind levels, everything seems in order. We see colors only where we want, and all the branches are moving along their own curve. Here we only have 2 wind levels, but you could have more and really build your own hierarchy. Now I'll turn off the wind and go back into the standard render because we're ready to assemble our model. So I changed scene because I added some small stuff like flowers and rocks. And if we look at my custom mesh here, you can see I was super lazy with the tip of the branches there. They kind of look like fingers, but it's okay because thanks to the curve, we can add extension on top of them. So now if I just add a bifurcating branch generator, we see it's super easy to add some procedural parts. They're already welding. So if I just add some more segments to make it smoother, here you can see. So from there, it's very easy to change the generation style, change the number of branches you want. Or you could add all the procedural generators you want on top of your mesh. So here, if I just go into spine, I can make them longer. I can also change the radius, but you see now that they're pretty thin and my number is high. That's because of the parent branches. So if I go into the parent branch generator and then adjust the radius from there, the child will change as well. So now let's hide my fingertips because they're not looking super good. So if I go back to my procedural branches into generation, I can go into extend parent and any. And bam, we have extensions that will hide my little fingertips. So you see here, we have a difference of radius between the other branch and my extension. And that's because I changed the curve of the parent branch in node mode. So if we go into the skin in node mode, you see I added a little spike there in the curve. So that means I can really change each spine specifically to fit my custom mesh. So once you have a texture that looks like the one you have on your custom mesh, and also you have wind in there, it's gonna be barely visible, which is really awesome. So remember when we created a new generator for our spines, that means I can have different kind of procedural branches on different parts of my custom mesh. So that's really awesome. You could make something really complex if you wanted to. So let me just remove those parts here. And now I have some generators that I copied from another scene. So that can be a great way to save time, by the way. If you have work that you love, you can use it over and over again in different scenes. And it's just super easy to add on our custom mesh. So then you can go into node mode or freehand mode. And like you would a procedural tree, you can just change everything until you're happy with the composition. Here you see we have an extension with the proper texture. We can barely see it. But if you wanted to have something more precise, you could also use a stitch generator that will create a blend-in texture between your custom mesh and your procedural part. So that can be an option for you as well. So now if we look at it with the winds, everything is moving and it's really great. It's easy to iterate. And yeah, I'm pretty happy. So I added some extra stuff on top. So you see now I added vines and decals to make it look more interesting visually. And if we look at the vines, I use the mesh as a mesh force. So the vines looks like they are resting on the main trunk. And it's looking really, really great. I love vines. I think they're awesome. And now if I show everything again, this is the final result. So our tree is complete and we are ready to dive into our second case study, the rose. So this is our scene. We have an imported mesh that is the rose. So you can see when I rotate around. We imported the material. We assigned the mesh to this material. And then if I just show you how I did this, I'm gonna hide those. The first thing I do is add a branch generator. I'm gonna use tube and I don't want any branches. So I'm putting the generation to absolute, the number to 0, and I want to extend the parent. So now we have a super long branch. We'll make that shorter. That should be good. Then we don't want any skin on it, so I'm putting it to spine only. Then I can add a mesh generator on top of it. Then assigning the material, so we have the rose there, but I don't think it's wide enough, so I'm going to the deformation tab and then just playing with the scale a little so it looks more harmonious. Like we did with the tree, if I were to just simply add wind right now on this mesh, going to the wind and then enable it, you see that everything is moving together. Again, this is perfect if you're working with a trunk, but with a mesh like this, it would be really more interesting if all the petals were moving separately. So that's what we're trying to do here. Now, if you remember from the first part, the first thing we need is the mesh helpers. So again, we have the two buttons, S for start and E for end. And in this case, we want each petal to move separately, which means each petal is going to need a curve. Because it's going to make a lot of mesh helpers, well, it would if I were to add a mesh helper from each petal, I'm going to use the same two buttons over and over again for all the petals. So the same way, I'm just going to set the point seconds and then assign the curve to the mesh, which means to the rose. Then once my curve is created, I can use the same mesh helpers and move them to the next petals. So we're just placing them again using the same shortcuts, clearing the point seconds, and then setting the point seconds again. So we'll do that for all the petals. Almost there. And now the final one. Et voila, we're done. So now we have all the curves we need. So the same way we did with the tree, we can enable the wind on the spine. Make sure apply is selected. And then on the mesh, in the wind section, we want to apply the wind. And then we could choose the best guess and manual for the wind waves or go fully manual. Usually I would recommend to go best guess and manual so you can see what the modeler gives you right away and then change it if you need to. So you see here that there are some problems happening in the petals. There are some weird deformation. That's because some vertices are not assigned to the proper curves. What we learned before is that we can go into the freehand mode and then into vertex edit And then we can select some vertices to assign them to the right curve. But first, let me show you the wind weights. Just wait until it shows. Oh, that's the first one. That's not the one we want. We want level 2 because the first one is just for the stem. Okay, so we can see that there are some vertices that are assigned to a curve that belongs to a pedal next to them. So what did we learn before is that we can select some vertices and reassign them. So we can hold the spacebar and then left click to select the vertices. So if I just try to select one petal, it's quite difficult. There are always some little vertices that I don't want in there. I could try to use the soft selection if I make it a little sharper and then reduce the distance. Choose just the tip maybe. No, there are always some vertices in there that I don't want. But we have a solution for that. If you look into the options of the vertex edit, we have select all with all the matching vertex color. If we go into the mesh window, we can take a look at the vertex color of the mesh. So you see here, I assigned a tint different for each of the petals. It can be very easy to paint it on or assign it in another DCC, so you can go ahead and then re-import your mesh. And I should mention the tint doesn't matter as long as they're different, so you can choose whatever palette you want. Now we're ready to select some vertices. So I'm just going to select some on one petal and then use the select with all matching vertex color, and bam, we have a petal that is selected. So all we need to do now is to pick a spine and select the proper curve. And then we'll just do that for all the other petals. For the middle of the rows, I didn't feel it was necessary to have each of those petals move separately. So what I'm doing is just selecting some vertices from each petal, and then I can click on select all with all vertex color. I'm going to get all of them, even though they don't have the same color. You just need to hold Control spacebar and click to add to your selection. And now that this is done, everything seems in order. I can just go back into the standard mode, so into view, render, and then standard. And if I apply the wind, this is a victory! All the petals are moving separately and according to their own curve, so it looks really great. So you could imagine what kind of custom mesh you could have here. You could go wild. Then you just need to go into the wind option and play with the settings until everything is perfect for you. So little jump in time here. I added a few things like leaves and then added colors to the spikes. And also another thing I did is add some LEDs to that custom mesh. So if I turn off the wind, and then if we look into the mesh panel, we see I have LEDs here, so the mesh is optimized. And then I'll go back and show you the wind weights. So we have the level 2 here, and we want to have the same wind weights on all the different LEDs because we don't want the animation to pop whenever the camera is going away from the object in an engine. And if we just click on transfer rigging data to all other LEDs, and then I slide, you see that everything is moving together as I go down the LEDs. Don't mind the leaves, it's just because I didn't set them correctly. It doesn't matter. So now if I go back into standard view, this is the rose in all its glory. So I can't wait to see what kind of projects you're gonna come up with, and see you at the next video.